Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where we have discussions on digital disruption and becoming the CEO of you. Each week, I bring in a guest, someone who's dope, who's getting out there, putting in the work, and we have the discussions on and strategies and ideas on how you can live your best life. I am your host, Dr. Will, and today I am here with Chris Castillo. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Quite well, thanks for asking. You came to me via, oh my gosh, why can I not remember her name right now? And this is a recording. Our friend in Colorado, Crystal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm sorry, Crystal. But she reached out to me and told me, look, Chris is awesome. She's doing these wonderful things. And I think you should interview her on the show. And we talked and I agreed. And I'm very excited to have you on today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. So for those who will be watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast on SoundCloud or iTunes, will you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Chris. As Dr. Will mentioned, I am the founder of Empowered Achievers. So that is my career coaching and development business where I work with high achieving professionals to build careers they love. Mainly what that means is typically I work with a lot of millennial women who are at the point where they're kind of having questions about their career and they're looking to either figure out a way to grow where they're planted or what that next step might be for them. So that's typically who I tend to work with.
Awesome. So who is Chris Castillo? And I know you just briefly mentioned your company, but can you go into what is Empowered Achievers?
Yeah. So, Empowered Achievers, again, is really career coaching and development. I work with companies in terms of helping them build training programs for their employees to essentially feel like more of themselves at work. A lot of times, so I come from a corporate learning and development background, which is a lot of, how I got into the work that I do these days. But that is why I started the business, is because, and I can definitely go more into that of my background, but I essentially help people with the stuff that I used to struggle with, of getting clear on what you want in your career. And I think the whole reason I started Empowered Achievers, and the thing that I feel so strongly about, is that I think it's wrong to think you have to be, that work has to feel like hard work all the time, right? Mm-hmm. This is something I hear a lot, and to me it makes me so sad to hear this when I hear it from people. And so that's why I started Empowered Achievers, is to help more people feel like they have ownership of their job and they can make it something that's a really rewarding, wonderful part of their life.
So I'm always interested in how people actually choose their professions. Like what makes someone say, hey, I'm going to be an orthodontist versus I'm going to be a zookeeper. Yeah. What drew you to career coaching?
Yeah. So, well, just in terms of people being drawn to their career, one thing I will say just as a caveat is often people kind of approach it as digging in a bunch of places and hoping they strike gold, right? When the reality is you can go about it a lot more deliberately. My background is pretty interesting in the fact that I originally come from the world of corporate advertising. So when I was in advertising, my most recent ad experience was at an agency out of San Francisco, where I worked on, Google was my main client. I worked on their account. It was great. It was really everything that I said in college that I was really hoping to achieve, right? I checked off all the boxes and I got there and I got to go to these cool dinners and all of the things that seem fun about advertising. And I got there and I started to have some questions. And I had doubts about, do I like this, or is this just what I've been doing since college and since graduation, and this is all I know? And at the same time, it was kind of the world and work were both seemingly conspiring against me. I had a terminally ill mom at home. I had a lot of things that made me kind of question where I was spending my time. And it was truly, I explain it to people now, as the perfect storm to make me really ask how I was spending my time, essentially. And so within that same company, actually, I had started training employees internally on how to do the work that I did so that we could scale. And that's when I got my first exposure to training. And that's when I fell in love with learning and development, because I loved getting in front of a classroom and getting the energy up and see people's eyes light up when you could tell that they were learning something, which I'm sure as an educator, you know the excitement of that and having that impact. And so that's actually how I transitioned into learning and development. So I stayed at the same company and grew where I was planted, moved teams. They didn't have headcount for me at first. And I worked with them until I over the course of a year, transitioned into professional development and have been in development ever since and built my own business in that same realm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, we're all facing challenges in our own lives and throwing the need to pay the bills and the volatility of the job market. And people are just happy just to have a job. What does living a life of purpose mean to you?
So there's a few things to that. The first thing I want to touch on is the idea, and this is something I hear a lot from clients actually, is the idea of if I want something more, that means I'm not appreciating what I already have, right? And I don't buy that. I think that that's a really common catch-22 we put ourselves in, because I've had almost a majority of my kind of first intake calls. I'll talk to people about, okay, where are we looking to go towards? And they'll say all these exciting things, and then they'll immediately undercut themselves and say, oh, but I know I have it pretty good. Like, I'm not saying you don't, right? You can still be super thankful for what you have and still push yourself to want more. I don't think that it's a zero-sum game. I don't buy that. So that's one thing when it comes to the, appreciation element that I just have to mention. But in terms of what living a life to purpose means for me, I think one of the big things is it's all about what do I value, what's important to me, and how do I do more of it. And I think it's really easy to assume that means you need to go into something that's inherently altruistic, right? I need to go do Doctors Without Borders, or I need to start a nonprofit. You can absolutely do those things, but you don't have to. And I think when it comes to the idea of like people have bills to pay, I get it. I'm not suggesting you just go do, take a trip around the world unless that's something that you're set up to be okay with doing. I think there are things that you can either tweak in your existing role to get more of that, or you can do something on the side. I don't think it's, has to have all your weight behind it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It just makes me think of, those people who are like, work used to be exciting. I used to just get up and go, and I could hear the birds and I could see the dew, the mist on the leaves. And now work is like, but I know, I have a mortgage. I got some kids in private school.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So, because I want to throw that out there to you, because when people come to you and they say, they express the sentiments that I just did, how do you get them to sort of reframe their thinking into understanding that it is okay for them to want more, that it is not being greedy or unappreciative to want something different?
Yeah, and those are typically larger things that we've taken on from what we've heard, how we've heard our parents talk about money, or any of those things, which are something in and of itself that I'll often work with one-on-one clients. But it's the idea of, I think there's two things. One, there are ways to have a little bit more fulfillment without having to be a completely different thing, right? So one of my clients actually earlier this week, a perfect example is we were talking about connection and how feeling connected to her clients was really important to her. And she was saying, well, at the job I'm at, it hits all my other buckets, but I don't really feel like I have a huge connection with my client. And I said, is that a must have for you? And she eventually came to the answer, yes. And we went into, instead of just saying, well, that means you have to leave, I said, well, is there a way that we can get more connection to them? So yes, you don't care about, she said to me, I don't care about what my clients care about. But even if you don't care about what your clients care about, is there a way for you to care about them? Can you get to know them on a personal level? Maybe that would give you that same kind of feeling, right? So one, it's all about how you're kind of trying to feel what things fulfill you, and doing that, even if it's sometimes it's a creative way. Because often I see people think of it as really black and white, which is a huge misstep in my book of, well, I either have to stay in corporate and sell my soul or be Mother Teresa. I'm like, there's probably somewhere in between. And that's really what I like to focus on with people, because it's easy to put so much pressure on yourself. And again, with the example you said of, it's expensive, I have a mortgage to pay, I have kids in school. It's easy to look, especially I've seen with millennials, to the examples of their parents who have maybe been, I know my dad was in the same job for 35 to 40 years or something like that. He was there a really long time. And so of course, all of his advice to me is super well-intentioned, but it comes from a different perspective than the current job market. So I think it's keeping that in mind too, and looking for more examples of people who do things with that different path and who still make just as much money but don't work in corporate. Like, there are definitely people who do it. So I always like to make people kind of think of the other perspective, and keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. So traditionally, we've all been told, go to college, you get this job, you buy this house, or you go on vacation. Like, these are all the things that we associate with being successful in this country. But we know that things are changing. So I do this, right? I play by the rules. I'm doing everything they're telling me, and I'm going to work. And I am working. How should people sort of go about getting clear on the type of work they were meant to do? And what should their job search actually look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, the idea of that conventional path of success, that totally works if that's something that resonates with you. But I would start by saying, figure out what success is to you, because it's really easy to take on, right? I mean, I completely remember my mom saying to me in college, well, don't do art history because that's not going to be a really useful major. You should do business or science, right? And of course, parents say these things, and it's never with ill intention. I always say, parents want what's good for you, but they don't always want what's best for you. So what I mean by that is, sometimes, at least speaking from perspective of my own family, they always want the safe route, and they want what's really good for you. It's a tried and true method. If you do this, you'll be successful. And that's totally okay. But sometimes, if maybe what's best for you is not so much of that conventional path. And I know that's something that personally I had to come up against and redefine what success was first and foremost. But to your question of how do I know what their job search should look like? This comes to the idea of, what do I like? What do I not like? And what kind of trends can I find in that to map to a career? But I would also say, if you're just graduating from college, don't put so much pressure on yourself to feel like you have it perfect right away. Because there's growing pains for anyone. And the biggest thing I like to stress with people is, no matter what decision you make, you can always make another decision. Even if you take a job and it ends up not being the right job, I learned a lot, and I know now what I want in the next job, or I know what I definitely don't want, right? So in terms of job search, that would be kind of my first take on it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Now, I'm going into my 5th year with the school district I'm working. How often should people take stock of where they are in their careers, and what sort of questions should they ask themselves?
Yeah. So I personally think it's important to always be looking at your career, which is maybe an idealistic idea, right? But I think the thing is, it doesn't need to be such a formal process. I said to people often, development is not something that you just do and then you're like, okay, I'm done. I developed. I grew all I needed to grow. If so, that's probably a red flag. But so it's how to make it more of a lifestyle, right? How to check in with yourself more regularly so it doesn't feel like those days that you're saying, I'm going to do an assessment of where I'm at. If you save it all up, it gets really daunting. It's like expense reports. If I have a year and a half of expense reports to do, it's going to be really painful. But if I do it ongoing, it's a little less terrible. So in terms of development, that would be my biggest recommendation, is to work it in on the regular. There's a ton of great things on my site. There's some book recommendations, and one of them is this thing called the 5-minute journal that I really like because it's actually doable every day. And it's just kind of like a quick check-in on, what are 3 things I'm grateful for? What are 3 things I can do to make today awesome? And it doesn't take that much time. Whereas I know personally in the past, I generally have a longer kind of list of things I do in the morning to get myself going for the day. But I know that there's also days where I have friends at our house and I don't want to have to be like, excuse me for an hour and a half while I go do my morning meditation. So I think doing small things to incorporate it into a lifestyle of growth, setting regular time to read your book, setting as your Sunday practice, what kind of things you want to do as you're going into the week. And then while they're actually developing, to ask themselves those questions, really the ones kind of mentioned in the last question too, but the idea of what do I like, what do I hate, and why? So that's actually an exercise I do with much more extensively, because we'll walk through each of those with clients as they start on. But it's the idea of what can I learn about myself from this? So for example, when I was in media and I really, loved getting to train people. Well, what was it about that? It was because I could have an impact on people that was one-on-one. I could see them learning something. I could help them so that they left the room feeling like they could do more than they came in thinking they could do. That for me is the why. And so those are the things you want to kind of theme up. So those are the questions I would always recommend people start with.
So how do you get them to articulate that? Because it's always easy to say, I hate this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Whether it's my boss, or I hate paperwork, or I hate the travel, but it's more difficult to do that sort of real introspective work to really say, I love this. I want this. This re-energizes my spirit. So how do you, in working with your clients, get them to articulate that these are the things that they love to do?
Yeah. Well, sometimes what you hate can tell you just about as much as of what you like, right? As starting with what you like. So for example, oftentimes it's easy for people to say, oh, I feel like my boss is micromanaging me. Well, what does that tell you about how you work best in the role? So normally I just have people say, why, until they chunk it up to something bigger. That I think is a lot of the, that's why it's helpful to go through it one-on-one, because I can actually ask them those questions, because I've done this so many times that now it's gotten pretty quick for me to say, oh, it sounds like really what this is about is X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's about communication or having some sort of deep understanding of other people. So one, I've just gotten pretty good at asking the questions, but for people who are starting this on their own, I would just, even the things that you don't like, why do I not like it? And just ask yourself why until you get to kind of the meatier thing, opposed to just, because he's a jerk. Well, why is he a jerk? Well, because he never lets me do anything on my own and, micromanages me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So nowadays, and here's the thing where social media has sort of made people feel sad. It's easy to get on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and you see these people they're just bawling out like, my gosh, your life is amazing. How can people just not get swayed by it and not fall victim to comparing their today to someone's tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there are plenty of people in my life who I love so dearly, and I hear do it, and it's a struggle, right? Because people have to want to do something about that. I think the biggest thing, as you said, someone's today with, or you're today with someone else's tomorrow, it's easy to compare your biggest weakness to someone's biggest strength. And so one thing I would say for that is start with your strengths, and coming back to the idea of like gratitude journaling is a super well-known practice within the industry, but I think there's so much value in, I have all these things going for me. And also here's the things that I can do better. I know these are my strengths, right? For me, yeah, I might not be the most skilled artist in the world, but I know if I say I'm going to do something, I will move heaven and earth to make it happen. And that's something that I think is a really standout thing about me. So make that list for yourself too, to come back to, and make that list, do that, add to your things that you're grateful for. And then the other thing I'd say is the humanizing piece. So, the fact that people would be aware about it is the first step. You have to, I use the acronym in terms of focusing on the work you want to be doing of PAR. So pause, appreciate, reset. But you could apply that same thing here. Catch yourself doing it. Once you catch yourself, appreciate it by saying, wow, what can I learn from this, right? What can I be thankful for this happened? As much as I'm saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person has this opportunity. Well, maybe that's making me realize, Gretchen Rubin has a wonderful podcast, and she said once, using people's, the things you're jealous of as reminder that that's something that you're going towards. So use it like that. Oh, this is just as a reminder for me that I think I want to try and do more speaking gigs in this next year. And then reset. So what's the healthier way I can approach this of saying, I want to move towards that. And it's so great that I have people in my life that I can look for, because as you surround yourself with people who are doing the kind of things you want to do, it's a lot easier to see that pathway for you, so to speak.
So once people are able to articulate what they want, how do they go about making that transition if that is necessary?
Yeah. Well, so it depends. If transition is, it can be a new role, it can be within the same company. The thing I always encourage people to do is, if you can grow where you're planted, that's always going to be the easiest, right? Because there's automatic buy-in. For example, when I moved into learning and development at the agency that I was at in San Francisco named Essence, I was on the media team, but they already knew me. They already knew that when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. So even though I was changing to a team that I didn't have as much experience in, they were okay to give me that chance. And so one, if you can pivot internally and grow where you're planted by asking, which is a huge gap for so many people, is just the fear of the ask and, oh my gosh, what if they say no? Then they say no. And then you want to look somewhere else if they can't give you that opportunity. So ask, see if you can do it a little more internally, but focus on the small steps, right? If you're taking a tiny step each day towards this direction, you're going to get there eventually. I often see people say, well, I'll pick on advertising because that's where I came from. I don't like advertising, so I want to become a trapeze artist. Yeah, you could do that, or you could do something where you get a little more of that, whatever you're looking for in advertising. And so focus on the small steps. And if you can grow where you're planted, go for it. But also just ask, because the reality is, worst case scenario, someone says no, and then you can go somewhere else. I say to people often the idea that a good career is like a good relationship. You both put out there what you're looking for, and if it works for both of you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. Maybe you have to part ways. I know it rarely goes as smoothly as that, but it's the same thing with the job. Is you ask them if you can do that in the role, and if they can, hooray! I'm glad you asked. If they can't, you get to decide if that's important enough for you to move elsewhere.
So what is the greatest lesson you've learned about career fulfillment?
Greatest lesson in terms of career fulfillment. I think there's two ones that I would highlight for this, which is, one, you can always rise to the occasion, right? Because I think I have a lot of clients, and maybe this is testament to it tends to be like the high achiever perfectionist tendencies, but you get 10 steps ahead with the decisions in your mind. You're like, well, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to be on my trajectory for this goal that I'm setting for in 25 years, and I'm not going to be able to retire early. You'll always rise to the occasion. If something's not working for you, you'll step up. I've seen this with every single one of my clients. So that's, I think, one really good lesson. But then also, I think the biggest one is just, it's not so much about what you do. It's more about who you're being, right? So it's people focus so much on the tacticals of only if I had a better manager, or if I got to work on this different project, all of those things are going to happen, and then I'll feel happy about my career. And it's more so about getting your core values and needs filled, right? For me, a huge part of why I do the work I do is because I love the human connection element and getting to feel like, have people realize things. If it doesn't matter the tactical of what I did, that's how I found it, because I'm getting to get those needs met that are really important to me. So focus on who you're being, opposed to just your laundry list of to-dos.
I like that. Excuse me.
So before we go,
excuse me?
I said you can take that one.
All right, I will. Before we go, what is your call to action for those educators who will be listening? They feel stuck, but being a teacher is all they ever wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The idea of feeling like you don't have another option is a terrifying thing. While I haven't been a teacher, I can definitely identify with, when I was in advertising, I felt like, well, this is what I've been doing since college. So how would I would have to start over. How would I even be able to do that? More often than not, there's a lot of things that you can transfer, right? These are the transferable skills. So remember that there is always a way to build in a little bit more excitement, and that there is another option. It's not so black and white like we talked about before. It's easy to feel like there isn't, but I can guarantee if you just focus on what is it about teaching that I really love, how is there another way I can incorporate it? There's normally a good third solution. And that's the difference of internal versus external discipline is often we can give our friends really great advice, and then when it comes to taking advice ourselves, people struggle. And it's because you're not thinking as level-headed necessarily. So think about, what you would tell a friend. I'm sure if a friend said to you, well, I've always wanted to be a teacher, and now I have no other options, you would say, well, of course there are. Let me find these 20 different routes of things you could take. So think about it from that perspective too. Don't be so tough on yourself because you're you.
Awesome. So let's end this podcast by telling the listeners how they can connect with you on social media and how they can actually work with you if they are hearing this podcast and they're saying, Chris got the goods and I'm trying to get to the next level.
Yeah. So you can find me on social media. I'm Chris Castillo, but you can just search for Empowered Achievers. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. More importantly though, if you're kind of having questions about your role or what that next step might be, I offer free consultations, and that's a way for me to make sure it's a good fit from both perspectives, right? Because I want to take on clients who I know we can see big results with, and I want clients to feel equally as comfortable because it's an important relationship. So you can always, on my site, beempoweredachievers.com, you can schedule a free consult and meet me there.
Awesome. Thank you again, Chris, for being a guest on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome anytime. Now, people, you know how I do this. Excuse me, open my throat. And see, this is so live, so I'm not going to even edit that out. People are going to hear it and just know that's how we do it around here. So the video cast will be going up on YouTube. I need you to subscribe. I need you to leave your feedback, give Chris a holler. I need you to go to iTunes and SoundCloud and subscribe to the podcast as well. Leave some comments, people. I'm trying to get Oprah on the show. All right. So I need you to just shower me, sprinkle praises, so I can go to Oprah and say, look at your boy, Oprah, look at your boy.
Yeah.
So again, Chris, I want to thank you. As always, people, invest in you, EDU. Peace.